Hey, welcome back, Accounting 604. This is now video number 2 in our Module 4 exploration. As you can tell from the title slide, what we're looking at now in this deck is the Dupont Disaggregation of Return on Equity. And that is a mouthful, and I grant you that, but this is the classic traditional analysis of ROE. Disaggregation essentially referring to breaking apart the elements of ROE for greater analysis. All right, so let us climb right into this. What is return on equity? We know essentially that it is the net income divided by the average level of stockholders' equity over a period of time. And the reason why we are interested in this is because it provides us some insight into what do company owners, the actual owners, derive on a periodic basis from the performance of the company. That's what ROE really exposes. Now, the DuPont analysis of disaggregating ROE into 3 components helps us to better understand what are the elements that are actually driving financial performance in a particular company. And so you sort of see here on this slide the components that we are going to try to take a closer look at are profitability, productivity, and leverage. Now, the first two, profitability and productivity, we began discussing in Module 2, you may remember, from our discussion of ROA, return on assets. And now, in ROE, we add in a third element, the element of financial leverage. And additionally, in this module, one of the things that will be challenging to wrap your arms around conceptually is the discussion of separating out the operating elements of ROE and examining them and trying to distinguish them from other non-operating activities and the influence they may have on ROE. More on that in a future deck, but nevertheless, that's sort of where we're going. So now let us look carefully at the actual traditional classic formula for the disaggregation of ROE. You see it here on this slide right here. Again, ROE we have defined as net income attributable to company shareholders divided by the average stockholders' equity over the period being examined. That equity attributable to company shareholders and not to outside interests. Now, the DuPont disaggregation then takes ROA, which you see there as the first fraction, net income over average total assets, which by now, of course, from doing the homework for Module 2, this is like an old friend, right? Okay. And now we add in to ROA the additional element of financial leverage, the degree of debt that the company has embraced in order to acquire those assets. And finally, the third element in this disaggregation, the degree to which there may be non-controlling interests influencing return on equity. And so you sort of see in the red box there, right, that if there is no non-controlling interest, that number becomes 1 because, well, just simple arithmetic. You take any number and multiply it by 1, you end up with the same number, right? So that should be relatively self-explanatory for now. All right, so if we go down to the bullets, what we're essentially saying is that ROE reflects a couple of different things, and that's what DuPont is trying to measure. The degree to which company performance is reflective of, the degree to which ROE is actually reflective of true company performance, and the degree to which, and this is the key, that return on equity is actually influenced by the way that financial strategic strategy has chosen to acquire those assets with debt. Greater debt can mean better amplified results and a higher ROE. Greater debt can also mean greater risk for the company of default and bankruptcy. Okay, so we're attempting to wrap our arms around that in our analysis. Now, you can sort of see here our old friend ROA, net income divided by average total assets, right? That will measure the return from the perspective of the entire company, the entire enterprise, right? And we've already said, right, that this includes not only profitability, right, net income, but also total assets in the denominator. And so, one of the things to note is that both these numbers, well, they come from different financial statements, don't they? Net income comes from the income statement, while as average total assets comes from the balance sheet. And so, one of the thoughts that should be in your mind is that wise, good, experienced managers will actually end up managing both their income statements and their balance sheets in order to do a good job at scale over time. Now, an example from the textbook, you realize in Module 4, the focus company is Pfizer. For 2022, their ROA ended up to be 16.6, whereas ROA, return on assets, for typical S&P 500 firms during the term were closer to 5 or 6%. We know what the story was there with Pfizer over 2022 and then, of course, 2023 when everything plummeted. But now we introduce this component of financial leverage. We try to express mathematically the degree to which assets have been financed with equity or debt. And we use this fraction here, average total assets over average stockholders' equity, to express what is the level of debt that is driving all of this. You may look at that and say, well, wait a minute. Why is there average stockholders' equity in the denominator and not, for instance, total liabilities? And just realize, right, this is really two sides of the same ratio, right? If it's 60-40 or 50-50, it's just which one are you looking at? This fraction looks at really stockholders' equity, right? And the other half, the other side of that, so to speak, would be debt. And of course, in the bullet points, what you're essentially describing is that the higher level of debt that a company embraces as a strategic financial strategy, the higher degree of default or possibly even bankruptcy, because, well, it's a contractual obligation. If a company doesn't do well, at the end of the day, the lender really, well, it doesn't really care, right? The lender cares about getting its monthly interest payments or periodic interest payments and the repayment of principal, and will end up going to court if they need to collect those in their the order of priority of repayment of debts. Now, if you are unfamiliar with the concept of financial leverage amplifying a deal, I have a short little excerpt about a minute and 15 seconds from a larger video. This video is called Crisis of Credit and is a fine little animated video trying to explain what happened in the great financial crisis of 2008. So yes, they essentially made an explanatory cartoon about the global financial crisis. I'm only going to show you a minute and 15 seconds of it, which expresses in really great, easy to understand terms how financial leverage amplifies financial outcomes.
Leverage is borrowing money to amplify the outcome of a deal. Here's how it works. In a normal deal, someone with $10,000 buys a box for $10,000. He then sells it to someone else for $11,000. For a $1,000 profit, a good deal. But using leverage, someone with $10,000 would go borrow $990,000 more dollars, giving him $1 million in hand. Then he goes and buys 100 boxes with his $1 million and sells them to someone else for $1,100,000. Then he pays back his $990,000 plus $10,000 in interest. And after his initial $10,000, he's left with a $90,000 profit versus the other guy's $1,000. Leverage turns good deals into great deals. This is
Okay, I hope you found that little snippet helpful, at least for a basic understanding of how leverage works at its best. And I think that even in the example you saw in that video, it shows you some of the things, or at least suggests some of the things that actually could go wrong, right? I mean, that entire premise only works if dude who borrowed all that money is able to immediately sell every single one of those boxes and none of the buyers renege. There were no delays, no hesitancy. You were able to turn that thing around because he had a one-day loan. And as you might guess, in the real world, right, when you run into challenges and complications, it can lead to, well, really bad outcomes, including at its worst, a default on debt or even bankruptcy. Now, returning back to our slide deck for just a couple of comments here, the other consideration we have here is what is the level of non-controlling interest for any company? While many larger companies report some degree of non-controlling interest, the actual fact is most of them, you can see there, the NCIR is actually pretty darn close to 1. In other words, you see the fractional equation there for calculating the degree to which non-controlling interest affects income and affects total equity, and that formula is trying to factor out the degree of non-controlling interest from both net income and the level of total equity. But you can see the last 2 bullet points in the slide, right? That really what we're saying is that for most S&P firms, NCIR is close enough to 1 where it really doesn't factor into the actual performance and financial results of the ROE, and therefore ROE can really be closely approximated with the simple ROA times the degree of financial leverage calculation. All right, so last slide in this deck, essentially what we are saying is this: some insights into our Dupont disaggregation. ROE is a composite of both company performance and the level of financing, your financial choices. Leverage can both amplify a deal or erode shareholder returns. Second point, leverage introduces risk, and really in your analysis, to what degree has strategic risk been managed well, and what do the capital markets expect, quite frankly? And then finally, there is a consideration of balancing the interests of common shareholders versus the entire enterprise. This becomes more salient when you're analyzing larger conglomerates or joint ventures. What are the returns that the entity level enjoys versus what are the returns that actual equity investors enjoy over time? So I hope that's helpful. We will continue to chat about each of these elements in the subsequent decks in Module 4. We will see you in the next video.